You ever have one of those moments where the people who are supposed to love you the most laugh at you? Not strangers, not classmates, not coworkers, your own parents. That was my life. And let me tell you, nothing cuts deeper than being mocked by the people you thought would always be in your corner. My name is Emily, and this is the story of how my parents spent years calling me useless, treating me like a joke, and how I went from being the invisible daughter to the only person who could have saved them when their empire came crashing down. But the best part? I didn't lift a finger for them. Let's rewind to when it all began. I grew up in a house where money was everything. My dad was a self-made businessman. Or at least that's the story he loved to tell everyone. In reality, my mom came from money, and her family's investments basically gave him the head start he never admitted to. Together, they built this image of being the successful couple. They owned a local chain of construction supply companies, dressed like they were always heading to some luxury event, and made sure everyone knew the Harrisons weren't just any family. We were the family in town. Except, not all of us mattered in that picture. My brother Jason was their golden child. He could do no wrong. He played football, he was outgoing, and he had this cocky smile that, apparently, melted people's hearts. He was the one they bragged about at every dinner party, the one they poured money into without hesitation. New car at 16? Done. Failing his college classes? No problem. Dad would call in favors to fix things. Jason was the prince. And me? I was the afterthought. I wasn't rebellious, I wasn't wild, and I wasn't flashy. I loved books. I loved researching, writing, spending late nights trying to understand people's behavior, why they made the choices they did. Psychology fascinated me. But in my family's eyes, psychology was a useless degree. I still remember the night it all boiled over. We were sitting at the dinner table. Jason was talking about some business plan he had, something about flipping properties with Dad's money, and my parents were nodding along, praising him like he'd just invented the cure for cancer. Then, when it was my turn to share, I told them I had declared psychology as my major. The room went silent for a moment, and then they laughed, not nervous laughter, not the kind where they didn't understand me. It was cruel. My mom actually wiped a tear from her eye. She was laughing so hard. My dad leaned back in his chair, shook his head, and said, "Emily, honey, no one makes money sitting on a couch listening to people cry. You might as well have majored in basket weaving." Jason smirked, stabbing a piece of steak with his fork. "Guess one of us has to be the failure, huh?" I wanted to disappear right there. That night I cried myself to sleep, and I'll admit it. I questioned everything. Was I making a mistake? Was my degree really useless? But then I thought about all the articles I'd read, the breakthroughs in mental health, how entire companies were starting to hire wellness consultants, and I knew, deep down, I wasn't wrong. They just couldn't see it. Still, their words left scars. Every achievement of mine was brushed off. Dean's List? Cute? Research assistant position? Does that even pay? Meanwhile, Jason could fail classes, get drunk at frat parties, and they'd still call him our future CEO. The breaking point came at my graduation. I had worked my butt off, graduated early with honors, and I was so proud. I saved 2 front-row tickets for my parents, thinking maybe, just maybe, they'd finally show up for me. They didn't. They went to Jason's out-of-town football game instead. A game, not even a championship, just some random game. I stood there in my cap and gown, smiling for photos with empty seats next to me, pretending it didn't matter. But inside, something snapped. That day, I made a promise to myself. I would never beg for their approval again. I would build something so unshakable, so powerful that one day they'd have no choice but to acknowledge me. They thought my degree was a joke. But they were about to learn the hard way that the useless daughter they ignored would one day hold all the cards. After graduation, I didn't go home. Honestly, I didn't even know if home existed for me anymore. I packed up my 2 suitcases, left my dorm, and rented the smallest studio apartment I could find in the city. It wasn't glamorous. The paint on the walls was chipped, the heater rattled in the winter, and the sound of sirens at night made it hard to sleep. But you know what? It was mine. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was living in the shadow of my parents' mansion. Of course, freedom came with a price. Rent, food, textbooks for the grad school classes I wanted to take, all of it was on me. And since my parents made it very clear they wouldn't fund useless hobbies, I had no choice but to hustle. I worked at a bookstore during the day and took a second job waitressing at night. Some weeks I was so exhausted I could barely keep my eyes open, but the thought of proving them wrong kept me going. Every dollar I saved felt like one step closer to independence. And here's the funny part. The more I worked with people, the more I realized psychology wasn't useless. It was everywhere. The customers at the bookstore who lingered just to talk about their lives. The late-night diners pouring out their problems over a plate of fries, even my own coworkers who came to me when they needed advice. I wasn't just listening to people cry like my dad sneered. I was helping them. I was making connections in ways money couldn't buy. But it wasn't easy. There were nights when I'd open my fridge and see nothing but half a loaf of bread and some expired milk. Days when I doubted myself so much that I almost picked up the phone to call home. Almost. And then I'd remember my dad's words, basket weaving. I'd slam the phone back down. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction. Then came my first real break. One of my professors, Dr. Levin, noticed how much extra work I was putting into research projects. He pulled me aside after class and asked if I'd be interested in joining a private study he was leading on workplace stress and mental health. It wasn't glamorous, but it was paid, and more importantly, it was experience. That study changed everything. I got to sit in on corporate interviews, see how companies ran, and hear directly from employees who were drowning in toxic work environments. And you know what struck me? No matter how successful the company looked on the outside, behind the scenes, people were burned out, anxious, and desperate for change. That was the moment I realized. Psychology wasn't just about therapy couches and crying sessions. It was about strategy, about understanding human behavior well enough to make businesses run better, and that was valuable. Meanwhile, back at home, Jason was apparently thriving. At least, that's what the carefully curated family photos on social media suggested. Him smiling with dad at some golf course, mom posting captions like, "So proud of our future leader." Every post was like a little jab, reminding me I was still the outsider. What they didn't know was that while Jason was playing the golden boy, I was quietly stacking skills and building something real. I started writing papers, attending conferences, and networking with professionals who saw potential in me. Not as a joke, but as someone who could make an impact. And then one night, I got a phone call that made me realize just how fast things were about to change. It was Jason. I hadn't spoken to him in months, so when I saw his name flash on my phone, I almost didn't answer. But curiosity got the better of me. Hey, he said, voice slurred like he'd been drinking. You still doing that brain stuff? I frowned. You mean psychology? Yeah, whatever. Look, I screwed something up, big time. Don't tell mom and dad I called, but I think I need your help. That was the first crack in the golden boy's perfect image. And I couldn't help but smile. Because for the first time in my life, they needed me. I wish I could tell you I hung up the phone on Jason that night, but the truth is, I didn't. Some part of me still had that little sister instinct, the one that wanted to help even though he'd never once had my back. What's going on? I asked, trying to sound neutral. There was a pause, then a heavy sigh. I made some investments. With Dad's money. He doesn't know the full amount yet. It was supposed to double quick, but it tanked. Hard. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the peeling paint on my apartment ceiling, wondering if this was real life. Jason, Mr. Golden Boy, the future CEO, was whispering to me like a guilty kid. Why are you calling me? I asked flatly. Because you study this stuff, right? People, business, whatever. I thought maybe you'd know how to spin it or, I don't know, fix it. That was the moment I realized two things. One, Jason wasn't nearly as smart as my parents made him out to be. And two, I had something he didn't: awareness. I can't fix your bad decisions, I said. But maybe you should stop pretending you know what you're doing. He didn't like that. He cursed, muttered something about me being useless as always, and hung up. But his call wasn't wasted. It confirmed what I'd suspected for a long time. Behind the polished family photos and bragging rights, the Harrison empire wasn't as stable as it looked. I didn't tell my parents about the call. Why would I? They'd just dismiss me anyway. Instead, I tucked the knowledge away like a secret weapon, because I had a feeling this wasn't the last time Jason, or my family, would come crawling. Meanwhile, my own life was shifting. Dr. Levin's project wrapped up, and because I'd put in more hours than anyone else, he recommended me for a consulting role with a mid-sized tech company. It wasn't full-time at first, just a contract gig, but it paid triple what I made waiting tables. Walking into that office for the first time felt surreal. Everyone was in sleek business clothes, buzzing around with laptops, and there I was, Emily, the failure, sitting across from executives who actually wanted my opinion. And here's the kicker: they listened. I gave presentations on employee burnout, suggested wellness strategies, and backed it all up with data. The company implemented half my ideas within 6 months, and their retention rate skyrocketed. Suddenly, I wasn't just scraping by. I was building a reputation. Of course, my parents had no idea. I didn't post about it, didn't share updates, didn't even tell extended family. I stayed quiet on purpose. Because if I had learned anything growing up, it was this: silence makes the reveal that much sweeter. But life has a funny way of forcing paths to cross. It happened at a wedding. A mutual family friend invited both me and my parents, and though I considered skipping it, curiosity got the better of me. I showed up in a simple but elegant dress I'd bought with my own money. Not flashy, not expensive, but professional, because by then I carried myself differently. I wasn't the awkward, overlooked daughter anymore. I knew my worth. And the moment I walked into that ballroom, I felt their eyes on me. Mom froze mid-conversation. Dad actually dropped his wine glass. Jason? He gave me that same cocky smirk, but this time it looked forced. Well, look who decided to show up, Dad said, trying to sound amused. Miss Psychology degree, I smiled. Hello to you too. They asked the usual small talk questions: what I was doing, where I was living. I kept it vague. I wasn't ready to show my hand yet. But I did notice something. Jason avoided eye contact when the topic of business came up. And Dad, he looked stressed. Not the proud, booming man I grew up with, but tight-lipped, distracted. That's when I knew. The cracks in their empire were growing wider, and I was about to be in the perfect position to watch it all come crashing down. That wedding was more revealing than my parents realized. I saw it in the way my dad's smile didn't quite reach his eyes, the way Mom clutched her glass a little too tight whenever someone asked about the business. And Jason? He was all charm and bravado, but his hands shook when he poured himself another drink. The Harrisons were slipping. Of course, they weren't about to admit it. On the surface, they still posted photos of fancy dinners and golf outings, still bragged about Jason being next in line to run things. But I knew better. I'd spent years studying people, reading body language, listening to what wasn't said, and everything about them screamed panic. Meanwhile, my own life was finally stabilizing. That tech consulting gig? It led to another. And another. Within a year, I had contracts with 3 companies, each paying me more than I'd ever thought possible. Suddenly, I wasn't choosing between rent and groceries. I wasn't working double shifts to survive. I was thriving. Moved into a better apartment. Nothing extravagant, just clean, modern, with windows that let in actual sunlight. I bought furniture that matched, splurged on a decent laptop, and even allowed myself little luxuries like fresh flowers on the kitchen counter. But the biggest change wasn't material. It was me. I wasn't the invisible daughter anymore. I was a professional. People introduced me at meetings as the consultant who saved us 6 figures in employee turnover. They asked for my opinion, respected my expertise, and treated me like someone who mattered. And yet, I still didn't tell. My family? Why would I? They'd written me off long ago. And deep down, I wanted them to stay in the dark until the exact right moment. That moment came sooner than I expected. It started with a headline. I was scrolling through my phone one morning, sipping coffee, when I saw it. Harrison Construction. Facing lawsuit over safety violations. My stomach dropped. Not because I cared about the company, but because it was real. The cracks weren't just rumors anymore. They were on full display for the entire city. The article went into detail. A worker had been injured on site, corners had been cut, regulations ignored, and guess who was running that project? Jason. I almost laughed. The future CEO was already driving the company into the ground. Over the next few weeks, the stories piled up. Lawsuits, delayed projects, investors pulling out. It was like watching a slow-motion train wreck, one I'd predicted years ago. And then came the phone call. It wasn't Jason this time. It was Mom. "Emily," she said, her voice sugar-sweet in a way that instantly put me on edge. "How are you, darling?" I raised an eyebrow even though she couldn't see me. Mom hadn't called me darling since I was 12. "I'm fine," I said cautiously. "Why?" She sighed dramatically. "Your father and I, well, we're going through a bit of a rough patch with the business. Nothing we can't handle, of course, but it got me thinking. You always were so good with people. Maybe you could, I don't know, help us, give some advice?" There it was, the first taste of desperation. I wanted to scream at her, to remind her of all the times they'd laughed at me, dismissed me, ignored me. But instead, I kept my voice calm. "I'm a little busy with work these days," I said. "Work?" She echoed, like the word was foreign to her. "Yes. Consulting. I've got contracts with a few companies right now." Silence. For the first time in years, my mother had no clever comeback. "Well," she said finally, her tone tight, "perhaps you could find some time for your family. After all, family is everything." I almost choked. Family is everything? Where was that philosophy when I was begging them to come to my graduation? But I didn't say that. Not yet. Instead, I smiled to myself and replied, "I'll think about it." Because deep down, I already knew. This was just the beginning. The empire that once made them untouchable was crumbling brick by brick. And soon they'd be standing in the rubble, looking to me for rescue. And I couldn't wait to see the look on their faces when they realized the useless daughter they had mocked was the only one who could save them. After Mom's call, I couldn't stop replaying it in my head. The same woman who once laughed so hard at my major that she had to wipe tears from her eyes was now asking me for advice. Not because she believed in me, not because she respected me, but because their little empire was starting to collapse and they were scrambling for lifelines. And I was one of them. But here's the thing. When you've been treated like an afterthought your entire life, you don't just jump when your family suddenly decides you're useful. You don't drop everything to run back to the same people who once left your graduation seats empty. I wasn't going to play savior, at least, not yet. Instead, I kept doing what I'd been doing, working, consulting, stacking my own wins in silence. But the Harrisons didn't stay silent for long. Within a week of Mom's call, Dad reached out. His voice was tight, clipped, like every word was costing him money. "Emily," he said, "I hear you're consulting now." The way he said the word, it was like he couldn't decide if it was real or some kind of hobby. "Yes," I replied simply. "And you're successful at it?" "I do well." There was a pause, and then he lowered his voice. "We could use someone like you, just for a little while, to clean things up. We'd pay, of course." I actually laughed. We'd pay. The Harrisons, who spent years calling me a leech, a failure, useless, were now dangling money in front of me like bait. "I'll think about it," I told him, repeating the same line I gave Mom. Because the truth was, I wasn't ready to show my hand yet. Not until they were desperate enough to actually see me. And desperate they became. The lawsuits multiplied. Jason's reckless spending was exposed in the papers. Investors fled faster than rats off a sinking ship. And through it all, my parents posted their perfect little social media pictures, pretending everything was fine. But behind closed doors, I knew they were drowning. How? Because Jason called me again. This time, he wasn't cocky or dismissive. His voice shook. He whispered. Dad's losing it. He's screaming at the lawyers, Mom's crying all the time. The banks are threatening foreclosure. I don't know what to do. I leaned back in my chair, listening. The same brother who once called me the failure was now begging me for guidance. Maybe, I said slowly, you should have taken psychology more seriously. He groaned. Don't start, Em. Please, just tell me what to do. And that's when it hit me. For years, I had been powerless in that family, the butt of every joke, the invisible daughter. But now, they were coming to me, all of them. And with every phone call, every desperate word, the balance of power was shifting. I didn't give Jason answers that night, just vague advice, enough to keep him coming back. Because I wanted him to realize something. My worth wasn't negotiable anymore. And as the weeks went by, word started spreading. People in the business world knew me, not as Emily, the Harrison failure, but as Emily, the consultant who turned companies around. What my parents didn't know was that one of my newest clients had just absorbed one of their failing projects. Quietly, legally. And now, without realizing it, the Harrisons were working under contracts that I had helped shape. They were already under my influence, and they had no idea. The first time I saw my family again after those desperate phone calls was at their house, or what used to feel like a palace. Growing up, that mansion felt untouchable. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, the smell of money in every room. But when I walked through the door this time, it was different. The shine was gone. The lights were dim. There were unopened bills stacked on the counter. Even the air felt heavier, like the whole place was suffocating under its own secrets. Emily, Mom gushed, rushing over to hug me. She was overdressed, caked in makeup, like she was trying too hard to keep up appearances. But her eyes were swollen. I could tell she'd been crying. Darling, you look wonderful, she said, her voice trembling just slightly. Dad came in behind her, trying to keep his composure, but I noticed the deep lines etched into his forehead. The confident businessman was gone. What stood in front of me was a man on the edge. Jason was slouched on the couch, staring at the floor, shoulders hunched. For once, he didn't look smug. He looked beaten. Well, Dad said, clearing his throat. We're glad you came. I crossed my arms. You didn't give me much of a choice, did you? Silence. For the first time in years, they weren't the ones holding the power in the room. I was. They started explaining. The lawsuits, the investors leaving, the projects collapsing. Jason tried to spin it, blaming bad partners and bad timing. But the truth was obvious. They'd been reckless, cutting corners, acting like they were untouchable. And now? The empire was falling brick by brick. We just need a little guidance, Dad said finally. Some strategy. You understand people. You could help us restructure, get investors back on our side. I almost laughed. My degree, my so-called basket weaving degree, was now the key to saving them. But instead of laughing, I leaned forward. Why me? Mom blinked. Because you're smart, Emily. You always were. I raised an eyebrow. Funny, I don't. Remember you saying that at my graduation? Her face fell. Dad shifted uncomfortably. Jason muttered something under his breath. For years, I had dreamed of this moment, of throwing their words back at them, of making them feel the sting I carried all this time. But now that it was here, I realized something. Revenge wasn't about screaming. It wasn't about tears. It was about control. I'll think about it, I said, my tone calm, measured. Mom reached for my hand. Please, Emily, we can't lose everything. This business, it's our life. And there it was, the desperation, the raw, unfiltered truth. They weren't asking out of love. They were asking out of need. I stood, smoothing my jacket. I'll let you know. As I walked out of that house, I felt lighter than I had in years, because for the first time, they weren't laughing at me. They weren't mocking me. They weren't ignoring me. They were begging, and I wasn't done making them beg. That night, I sat in my apartment with a glass of wine, staring out at the city lights. It hit me how different my life looked compared to theirs. They had marble floors and chandeliers, but no peace. I had a small but warm home, a job I loved, and people who respected me. And now, I also had something else: leverage. The next morning, I walked into a boardroom, not theirs, but the boardroom of the company they had mocked for years. You see, while they were busy flashing their wealth, I had been working quietly behind the scenes. I had built relationships with people they underestimated, people who actually listened, people who trusted me. And now, I wasn't just Emily, the daughter with the useless degree. I was a silent partner in several of their competitor firms that were thriving, thanks in part to the strategies I had suggested. When I looked at the financial reports, one thing was clear: their downfall wasn't just bad luck. It was calculated. Every contract they lost, every investor who pulled out, it wasn't random. It was me. Not directly, no. But my ideas had given their competitors the edge. My work had quietly dismantled my family's empire piece by piece, and they didn't even know it. Later that week, Jason called me again. His voice was raw, almost panicked. "Emily, please, we're drowning here. Dad's losing it, Mom can't sleep, and I don't know what to do anymore." For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then I remembered all those nights he'd mocked me, all the times he'd laughed with Dad at my dreams, and the way Mom never defended me. So I leaned back in my chair, twirling my pen. "You know, Jason, it's funny. You used to say my degree would never be worth anything. Now it sounds like you can't live without it." Silence, then a bitter exhale. "You win, Emily, just help us." Hearing that, it was like music, but I wasn't ready to give them what they wanted. Not yet. "I'll think about it," I repeated, my voice steady, calm, controlled. "In the meantime, Jason, maybe try reflecting on how you treated me. Consider it practice." When I hung up, I felt a rush of power I'd never known before. For years, they'd forced me to beg, to justify my worth. And now, they were the ones begging. But I wasn't done. Not even close. Because if they thought I was their only hope, they were right, and I was going to make them feel that truth every single day until they broke. The following weekend, I met them again. This time, not at their crumbling mansion, but at a cafe. Neutral territory, somewhere public, where the weight of their shame couldn't be hidden behind marble walls. When I walked in, I spotted them instantly. Mom, dressed to impress, but her hands fidgeting with her pearl bracelet. Dad, sitting stiffly, trying to look composed, but failing. The bags under his eyes told the truth. And Jason, slouched, looking smaller than I had ever seen him. I took my time walking over, ordered myself a latte, and only then sat down. The power shift was obvious. Dad started first. "Emily, thank you for meeting us. We've discussed things, and we're ready to listen." That last word, listen, made me want to laugh. For years, my words were dismissed as naive, childish, irrelevant. Now they were begging to hear them. I sipped my latte slowly before answering. "Well, if I'm going to help, there are conditions." Mom leaned forward. "Anything?" I raised an eyebrow. "Careful with that word." Jason rolled his eyes. "Just say what you want." I turned to him, calm and deliberate. "Respect for starters. You will never call my work useless again. You will never dismiss my ideas, my degree, or me, not in private, not in public." Jason's jaw clenched. He hated it. But he didn't argue. I continued. "Secondly, transparency. No more secrets. If I'm going to fix this mess, I need access to everything, every file, every contract, every shady deal you've swept under the rug." Dad shifted uncomfortably, clearing his throat. "That might be complicated." "Then it's simple," I replied. "No files, no help." Silence. They glanced at each other, and then I leaned in, my voice firm, but almost soft. And lastly, an apology. A real one. Not because you need me, but because I deserved it years ago. Mom's lips trembled. For a moment, I saw her pride crumble. She whispered, "Emily, we're sorry." Dad's voice was gruffer, forced. "Yes, we're sorry." Jason muttered it, barely audible. "Sorry." I let the moment hang, savoring it. Their apologies weren't perfect, but they were mine. And for once, I wasn't begging for them. They were offering them because they had no other choice. I leaned back, smiling faintly. Good. Now let's get to work. But inside, I wasn't planning to save them completely. No. My goal wasn't to rebuild their empire. It was to rebuild me, right in front of their eyes, and let them watch as the daughter they once mocked became the one holding the entire family's fate in her hands. The files arrived in a heavy leather briefcase the next morning. Dad had sent Jason to deliver them, though I could tell from the way Jason carried it that he didn't know half of what was inside. When I opened the case, I almost laughed. It wasn't just bad business deals, it was years of arrogance pressed into paperwork. Fake invoices, shell companies, backroom deals with shady partners. I had asked for transparency, and now I was staring at their rot in black and white, and instead of fixing it, I started documenting. Late at night, while they thought I was building strategies to save them, I was making copies, saving files, creating a timeline. Every lie, every illegal corner they cut. I was piecing together a puzzle that no amount of charm could cover up, but I also knew I couldn't be obvious. If I slammed them all at once, they'd spin it as betrayal. No, my plan had to be slower, more surgical. So when I went to our next meeting, I brought notes. Real ones. Suggestions for restructuring, for pulling back on certain projects, for changing their PR narrative. I gave them just enough hope to make them trust me. Mom clung to every word. Dad scribbled notes like a desperate student. Jason, he stared at me differently. Not with mockery, but with suspicion. He was the first to notice something didn't add up. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, narrowing his eyes. "You hate us." I smiled. "I don't hate you, Jason. I just learned not to trust easily." But inside, I knew the truth. I wasn't helping them rebuild. I was lining up the dominoes, ready for the push. One evening, as I left their mansion, I overheard them arguing through the walls. "Dad, she's not just helping, she's planning something." "Mom, don't be ridiculous. She's our daughter." "Jason, no, she's enjoying this. Can't you see it?" I smiled to myself. He wasn't wrong. The next week, I accidentally let a competitor get hold of one of their outdated contracts. Nothing illegal on my end, just a misplaced copy. Within days, that competitor launched a campaign that undercut my family's biggest project. Investors panicked. When Dad stormed into our meeting, red-faced and furious, he slammed the papers down. "They're vultures. How did they get this?" I shrugged calmly. "Maybe they were always smarter than you gave them credit for." The room went silent. I could feel Jason's eyes on me, sharp and suspicious. And that's when I realized the final stage of my revenge wasn't just going to be about exposing their corruption. It was about making them doubt everything. Every contract, every partner, every meeting with me. I wasn't just dismantling their empire. I was dismantling their trust in each other and in me, and soon they would tear themselves apart without me lifting a finger. It all came to a head at the investor meeting. The Harrisons thought it was a routine gathering, a chance to reassure stakeholders, patch over losses, and spin a story of recovery. But they had no idea I was running the show behind the scenes. I arrived early, dressed in tailored black, laptop under my arm, a quiet confidence radiating from every step. Dad greeted me with a stiff nod. Mom tried her usual sugary charm, and Jason. Jason looked like a kid caught in the principal's office. When the meeting began, I watched them stumble. Their scripts, their excuses, their rehearsed charm, it all fell apart. The investors could smell desperation. They could see cracks they hadn't noticed before. And then calmly, I opened my laptop. "Before we begin," I said, voice steady, "I need to clarify a few things." I projected the documents I had collected. The contracts, the backroom deals, the shell companies, the evidence of mismanagement. Every investor could see the truth in black and white. Mom gasped. Dad's face went pale. Jason's mouth opened, then closed. I've been consulting with competitors, I continued, and reviewing internal operations. What I've found is, well, it's self-explanatory. The room went silent. Investors murmured. Phones appeared in pockets. Emails were typed. By the end of the hour, the Harrisons were cornered. Deals were frozen. Partnerships evaporated. Their empire, the one that had once been untouchable, was crumbling faster than they could respond. And through it all, I remained calm, professional, untouchable. After the meeting, Dad turned to me, voice shaking. "Emily, what have you done?" I looked at him, my expression serene. "I did what you never did. I made sure the consequences of your actions were visible. And I didn't even break a sweat." Mom's lips quivered. "But you could have helped us. You were going to save us, weren't you?" I shook my head. "I never intended to save you. I only intended to show you that ignoring me for years had consequences. That mocking me, dismissing me, thinking I was worthless. That has a price." Jason for once looked small. You're insane." "Call it what you want," I said, closing my laptop. "Or call it justice." I left their office that day knowing two things. One, I was finally free from the shadow of their expectations. And two, I had earned every ounce of respect, power, and recognition they had once denied me. Walking out into the sunlight, I realized that revenge wasn't about anger or cruelty. It wasn't about tearing people down. It was about standing up, claiming your worth, and letting those who doubted you witness the truth. I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need their praise. I only needed myself. And that I had in spades. The Harrisons? They would have to rebuild. Without me, without the empire, and without the illusion of control they once wielded so effortlessly. And I was ready to step into a future built entirely on my own terms. Stronger, wiser, and untouchable. Because finally, the girl they once mocked was no longer invisible. She was unstoppable. If there's one lesson I've learned, it's this. Never underestimate the quiet ones, the overlooked, the useless. They're the ones who observe, who plan, who rise in silence. And when they decide it's their time, they don't just come back. They take everything you thought you controlled and show you the truth. Respect and power are earned, not given. And as for me, I earned it all. Thanks for watching. Hoped you liked it. If you watched till the end, please comment "love" so that we could understand you were with us till the end. As well as, please let us know, where are you watching? Form? Before leaving, please hit the subscribe button, comment your thought, and share with your nearest and dearest one. See you in the next one. Until to the next one, spread love.